VR Hand Controller Interaction Review. Spring 2022. Douglas Bowie. So one of the things that this independent study is to cover is an understanding of how a VR controller interacts with the user and with the environment. And this came about because I had finished my work on the VR Ohio College Green project, and it left me with a variety of unresolved kind of issues that really frustrated me while I was working on that project. I knew moving forward with VR work, I was going to need to understand that in a lot more depth. So I spent a bunch of time looking at how Unity specifically, because that's the development environment I'm using, works with the hardware to obtain input from different types of hardware from the user specifically. Ultimately, that's what we want, is user input. And what's it do with that? How does it work with that? And how does it translate that into object in the game? Now, this sounds like maybe something that's not as useful or not as interesting, but it turns out that the way the user perceives the immersive environment has a lot to do with what we'll call the resolution of being able to control objects and work with objects in that immersive virtual world. Several tasks that have been completed now, and I'll be able to show some of these in the demo, is I was able to select from a variety of VR environments in which to put my test setup in. I imported and configured both skybox elements and terrain elements to give it some sort of environment to run around and look at. I did a review of multiple Gauntlet, and we'll talk about what a Gauntlet here is in a minute, and hand controller APIs, or application programming interfaces. And I wound up creating a full motion system in a confined play area, which is pretty typical for this kind of thing, with a variety of both locally and distance grabbable objects. And again, we'll go over what locally and distance grabbable objects are. And I went through the process of creating a variety of C#, that's the programming language used to create interactive, quote, network objects. And I talk about network objects. Eventually, this project will go off and become part of my dissertation instrument. And so in a direction to aim that, these objects that I'll show in some of my demos are considered networks, and they'll be divided into smaller pieces. And that's a slightly different project, but I'll refer to it that way occasionally. So to go back a little bit, there are several different types of controllers. There are Gauntlet controllers, which are the standard controllers that you might see with an Oculus Quest, and I can show some pictures of that. But they would also be considered things like your Xbox 360 or your PlayStation controller. While not Gauntlet controllers, they are definitely controllers that the user uses to control whatever goes on in the virtual environment, either virtual immersive like VR or, video games. In many ways, a mouse is a controller of some kind. We use it to point at things and click at things and select things and that kind of stuff. A keyboard would also be considered a controller of some kind. In our context, these controllers are Gauntlet controllers, which come with, like I said, the Oculus Quest and Quest 2. Hand controllers are a relatively new concept that has come about just in the last year or so. And we'll be talking specifically about the Oculus Quest's hand controller interaction, since that's the hardware I have to work with. The Oculus Quest headset has a variety of small infrared cameras that are around the outer edge of the device. So think very low res kind of cameras, but they do a great job of being able to see the Gauntlet controllers and where they are in relationship to the visor itself. And this allows the Gauntlet to move around and the user to be able to move within the space and the hands to move independently, and it calculates and tracks all that. Hand controllers use those same infrared cameras to watch the user's actual physical hands. So fingers, joints, wrists, all that kind of stuff, and it can tell those relative movements with it. There's some discussion, and we'll go into a little bit more discussion about what those hand controllers mean, how they work. Two other terms I want to cover really briefly as they'll come up. Eventually, we'll see some of it in the demo that I'm going to do, is full body IK, or immersive kinesthetics. Full body IK, instead of just having disembodied hands that float around like Cousin It from the Addams Family, we might have an entire torso, minus the head, but when you look down, you'd be able to see your body. Often users have complained that it's disconcerting to only have these floating hands that move around. They struggle to understand their relationship to the object without being able to have another point of reference that might be their elbow or their chest or something like that. Partial kinesthetics, partial IK, attempts to solve some of that. It might provide hands and a forearm, hands and an arm, but no torso. And that way the user can kind of see their elbows in the peripheral of their vision and get a little bit more immersed in what's going on. It's less distractive. I currently have not implemented any of that in my particular demo, but I'm looking forward to investigating that eventually. There's a variety of other APIs that would have to be looked into to do that kind of stuff. Currently what we're seeing, and I looked into specifically, were APIs for hand controllers. So setting aside any of the IK kind of work, torsos, elbows, arms, forearms, that kind of stuff. The type of stuff I worked with was specifically, how can I work with hands in this environment? And one of the things I looked into were these variety of different APIs. Now, these are third-party things. The bottom one here, Oculus Hand SDK, is created by Oculus, which is owned by Meta, the people that make the Oculus Quest. But AutoHand and Hurricane VR are third-party. They're made and sold on the Oculus App Store, and I was able to obtain them and play with them and work with them. My project is implemented in AutoHand, which is up to version 3, and was a real joy to work with. It made using some of the controller and controller objects much easier. Now, the Oculus Hand SDK and the Oculus Controller SDK are the very basic things you'll get from the manufacturer. And they're basically building sandcastles out of individual grains of sand as you go. The Hurricane VR and the AutoHand do a bunch of that work for the developer. So they'll sit and create pre-made functions and pre-made functionality that they can hand up to a game developer so that the game developer doesn't have to sit and play with the Oculus SDK trying to build those same functions. So it's sort of a hierarchy, a stacking effect as we go. One of the things that became very obvious when I was working with this hand and gauntlet and things like that was this idea. As I worked with some of my colleagues, they have this controller resolution fallacy. Now, that's a term I created that is very difficult to understand, but immediately obvious the minute you put on a VR headset. And it's this idea that if I had a small table in front of me with pencils in front of it, I could reach over as a live person and pick a single pencil off the table, and it would be no problem. I'd reach down with my thumb and my index finger of either hand, select a pencil that I wanted, and pick it off the table. In VR, either with hand or with gauntlet, it's very difficult to do that. Which object, which pencil do you want? The resolution of touch and grab, especially with no haptic feedback, is not involved there. You can look, you can grab, you can kind of put your hand over it, and you start grabbing, and you might grab the pencil you want, or you might not. Now, this is true with hand and gauntlet. This makes development of immersive worlds and ideas using this system hard. It would be like having a hook and a thumb, and a big hook and a thumb, to pick up objects. And so now you go back to that pile of pencils with a hook and a thumb, and you kind of sit and play with it for a while until you can pick up the one you want. And that would mean you have one index and one thumb on each hand. And so it's difficult to sort. You tend to use both hands rather than sort of flicking them with your, your pinky and your ring finger and your middle finger out of the way and grabbing the pencil you want. You might have to use both hands to sort of sort the pencils on the table to then try to pick up the one you want. That becomes really difficult. Hand controllers suffer from this even more. In many ways, and I'll talk about this a little in the demo, the cameras point straight out from your head. And as the camera try to record what your fingers do, often the back of your hand blocks the camera. So it can't quite tell. It makes some guesses as to what you're doing when you try to pinch. And so often you are moving your hands off to the side so that you can show the camera as your fingers, and that can be very difficult. Gauntlet controllers don't suffer from that quite as much. They do use the infrared cameras for positioning, but they use Bluetooth and other ways to show button presses or the thumbsticks or triggers or whatever. So they can often be farther out to the side or sitting in your lap or something like that as you work with it, and that makes it a little bit easier to work with. VR controllers and objects and components, we not only talk about the controller, both the hand controller or the gauntlet controller, but we also need to turn around and talk about the objects themselves. So in our context, that would be talking about the pencils themselves, right? Not only do we have to have some sort of relationship between the controller and the hand and the object. So our objects have a variety of qualities to them, right? A pencil might be such, have such dimensions. It might be a certain shape. It might be a certain color. You might have yellow pencils and red pencils, and those are all qualities of different pencils. In the VR world, we have to define things like grabbable. Can I pick it up? Or is it just like a hologram where I move my hand through it? Or is it a solid object that doesn't move and I can't touch it? So the APIs that I looked at provided a lot of those, those discussions about, is it grabbable? Yes, it's grabbable. Okay, I can add the grabbable. I can add the distance grabbable component, which is kind of cool. It's like a Star Trek or Star Wars tractor beam where I can shoot it out there and suck it to my hand over some distance. That tends to be useful, especially if I've dropped it on the floor and I don't really want to bend over. I can sort of point the Raycaster at the ground and squeeze and it'll suck it up to my hand. One of the things the API provided that I really got interested was this concept of hand posing. So if I reach out and grab a cylinder, I want the fingers to wrap around the cylinder in the way we would expect fingers to do so in real life. And not, the Oculus API didn't necessarily provide that. AutoHand, which is the one I selected, provided a lot of really great stuff for that kind of thing. In fact, you could create custom objects and there was some level of automatic hand posing that it would figure out for you. And you could go in and set custom poses if you had a very specific object. Now this sounds like odd and things we don't think about in real life, but in an immersive world, you're in control of everything or have to be in control of everything. And so to maintain that illusion of immersion, you really have to think about these kinds of things. And it allows us to do that kind of stuff. And we will slide into demo time here. Alright, so these are the hand controllers. Yeah, you can kind of see my hand outline there, and I can, hold my fingers in certain ways to get menus. They'll show up, but you can see each one of my individual thumbs and fingers moves. And do that, and I'll get the Oculus menu to show up here in front of me, and we can move it around and things like that. And normally what you do is you pinch like that. You can see the icon right here changes as I pinch, and that tends to bring up, let's see if I can get it to do it. I just have to dork around with it to get it to work. It's not as intuitive as I might like. And we're getting there. So you can see on the overlay, you see the two circles. That's where my hand ray, you can see the little things pointing out. As I pinch, it'll let me do things like scroll, and I'm going to go and select one of the oh, there it is, it's at the top, Tiny Castles. This was a great finger app and worked really well with the hand controllers. I was really impressed with it. They did a nice job. They had a tutorial that led you through everything, which I'm going to show, and it did a super nice job of explaining it. You can see here I've got my hands, shows me some forearms, so I'm not getting full body kinesthetics or immersive IK, immersive kinesthetics, but we're going to go to Playground, and we're going to go, you'll notice it's all kind of pokey, and I have to lean forward a good bit to do some of this, and it's difficult to bring it forward to you. If I turn my palms toward me, I tend to get my Oculus menus like that, and that'll take me back out. But you can see that it's a very nice environment. They did a really great job making this app. It's a demo for hand tracking is what it is, called Tiny Castles. Part of the problem is that the cameras, and if you look at the bottom of the screen, sometimes you'll see my hands turn red like that, and that's because the cameras around the edge of the headset can't see what I'm doing. Many times you'll see here we're getting a button that it wants me to press, and I can go through a variety of interesting different options here. Now the cool part is there's a little bit of lag. You see the individual red tip of my finger, and I'll just go through some of the basics. I have to hold my finger, and you can see it fall away and come back, and I'm able to go forward and grab the brick, and all I'm doing, my physical hand is just pinching my fingers together, and I can go and interact with different things that are out here, and I can grab and toss, and my little critters will come back, and I can pick them up by just pinching with my hand and sort of fling, whoops, bye, fling, or I can do a variety of fun things with it there, then they'll run around out there. Some of the more interesting things that you can do with it wound up being a little later in the game. I'm trying to remember exactly where they were. I found this one to be pretty useful. Of course, they're trying to sell a combat kind of game, and if you reach over here, you'll always get a nice little demo, so it's telling me what to do with my fingers and my hand. I go like that, and I get flamethrowers, and the little guys will come back. But I can also do a variety of other things, like unit commands. This one was kind of interesting. And see, it's struggling to figure out where my finger is. I have to hold my hand in just the right way, because if I don't hold it sideways, if it can't see the tip of my finger, it doesn't know what I'm doing. So the natural motion of just poking doesn't work. It works for these, where I just reach forward and touch it, and reach forward and touch it. But for some of these, you have to actually hold your hand almost to the side so that it can see the tip and what you want to do. So in this case, I can pick my little guy up with my left hand, and I poke. Poking that button is quite the challenge, as I just talked about. You poke it. Whoops. Okay, go get him, little soldier. And he runs out there and does his thing, and the AI gets confused and attacks itself forever. Such is life in video games. Sometimes they get confused and attack themselves forever. We can also do unit targeting. Where it'll drop another little guy in front of me, and I can tell him to go to attack, and I tell him I want, oh, here, put him out there, he's going to go to attack, and he'll attack little soldiers. Useful stuff. Some of the interesting things, like grab hooks, were very interesting, because I could get it to do a variety of interesting things. You can see the motion I've got over here. Puts a ray cast out. That's that thing that comes out of my palm. And then I can grip and pull. And you can see it kind of moves around a little as I hold my hand out like that. And I grab and I pull, and it's going to pull it back and forth. So some of that's kind of interesting stuff. You know, we can see over here we've got, can't quite get my finger on it. There we go. We've got a crank, which is kind of a, you know, I can grab it with two fingers and do a little crank. I can reach over with my right hand and do a great big crank. So we're starting to see some interesting things. You know, it'll show me what it wants me to do, and it'll show me what it wants me to do. Starting to see some interesting kinesthetics with the hand controllers, but we're just not quite there, both in the UI kind of sense of the term. You can see I'm struggling here to just get back to the main menu. Because it needs to see the side of my hand to be able to see all my fingers. And the natural thing you want to do is put your hands out in front of you as it fades in and out. It can't quite figure out what it wants me to do. It almost needs another dimension of my hand, like from the top. And of course, if I look up, it has no idea what my hand is doing. So I can't do anything with my hands that isn't right in front of me. Now that's, the gauntlets also use some of these same cameras, but you can do smaller motions, and some of them can be a little farther, broader outside your view, and it can be quite the struggle to get some of that kind of stuff to work accurately, especially for different sizes of hands and different people. And most people don't want to sit with their hands and their arms straight out in front of them like this all day. So we'll start to see arm day become a big deal if hand controllers in this way become a big deal, because everyone will have gigantic shoulders as they try to hold their hands out in front of them. This part of the demo is the piece of software that I built in Unity, and it's going to go over some of the basic functions and go over some of the basic hand controls and things like that that I've been able to work with using AutoHand and Unity using the Oculus Quest hardware. see here I've got my hands in front of me, and I'm using the clench motion. So I get a Raycaster for distance grabbing with the Raycast, and with the trigger I can use my index finger, and so when I want to grab something I reach down, and as I get close enough within a certain distance that I predefined in the software, it will highlight the object that I have close enough, which is really easy when it's big, but as I get closer I'll clench, and that'll make me pick it up. So you'll see the hand sort of floats down and grabs it, and then I can pick it up. Now this object has no gravity associated with it, but lots of mass, which means when I put it somewhere it's going to stay, and it's going to be very hard to move. And as I pick it up, now I'm not using my index finger, I'm not quite smashing is the term that's used, and as I smash it will divide into two pieces, and I'll get a sound that goes with that I predefined. You can also hear the glass tinkling noise as I sort of bang it into things. It'll do that kind of thing. And I can grab either piece, and as I clench, and I can then move them around in different places and clench. And I can also raycast by clenching without, and then I pull the trigger and it sucks it to my hand. Boop. And it may bump into things on the way, so sometimes you have to get it out of the way again to do that. And we can continue to divide and subnet. This is a representation of a subnet. And there is a minimum size that it will allow me to get to. I can reach over and grab my sandwich, and it will of course interact with things. I can raycast and grab my tomato, and the tomato is kind of unusual. So I squash it, I give it the smash like I did when I divided with these, it'll crush it and explode and there won't be anything left. Now, one of the issues that came to light was the resolution at which you can grab things. And you can see the subnets are getting smaller. You see these blue things get smaller and smaller, and the highlighting was necessary because at this size it's quite difficult to tell when you're interacting with something. Now I've made it such that you can see it kind of in the hand there, but it won't let you make it any smaller than that. So we start out with a 2 meter long object that starts out as our network, and these different sizes represent the different types and sizes of subnets. And of course somewhere here we would have a problem description, and we can grab objects and stick it into that as we go. So over here I created a big reset button. It says reset network. You can see, ta-da, we start over again with our big blue thing. And if we get our sandwich out of the way, go away sandwich, we can reach over and hit reset, and it'll always put a brand new, no matter what you do with it, it'll blow away all the ones that are there, and it'll create a new one. And that way you can restart the exercise from scratch, and it's not, such a pain to work with. We can also reach over, I've got a couple other objects over here. This is a gravity cube that I can grab with both hands, and if I crush it, has gravity, each individual cube. Now this one's kind of interesting because as I grab it, I can grab it with both hands and pull the controllers apart, and when I do that, it'll crush the object. And this one's so small that if I try to grab it with both hands, it passes it back and forth. I can crush it, but I can't actually put two hands on it like I can with that one. This one is a gravity-less version of the same thing. So wherever I put it, it sort of stays. It's a lot like the long blue one. I can grab it with both hands, but I can't actually tear it apart. That seems to be a function of what happens when I grab one of the smaller ones. I haven't quite understood that. And this size seems to be the right size for that motion that allows me to do that kind of thing. I did not attach the reset function to the other cubes, so they just sort of flow around in here and we push them out of the way. The environment was created with prefab that I got from the Unity asset store. It's quite lovely. I added a little wind noise because it seemed like there needed to be some wind and some sun. You can see here we're in a closed environment, so while you can move around, you could get up and move as well. I'm able to use the controller gauntlet on the controller to move and turn. That way there's more workspace in case we want to spread out and use larger areas, larger networks. The text box in front of us allows for a description of a problem. We're planning on putting up something larger like a network design that you can grab the networks here and plug them into the answer key for use later. And this particular project was to work with how do I work with different objects and the controllers themselves, the hand controllers or the gauntlet controllers. So I've done a bunch of that. I'm going to throw it on the ground. just reach over and hit the reset button and it goes back. I hope you've enjoyed this lovely sunny day, even when it's not in Athens and it's raining. I'd like to thank you for your time watching this kind of lengthy video about the project I did this semester. I learned a ton, and I look forward to leveraging everything I've learned and understood and to learn some more as I move forward into my dissertation using all these different tools and creating an instrument in virtual reality. Again, thank you for your time.